Good afternoon, everybody. I hope everybody's having a good afternoon. Thank you so much for joining me today. My name is Marta Brooks, and I'm Department Chair and Associate Professor here at Regis University in the School of Pharmacy. And our topic today is the road not taken: career opportunities beyond community pharmacy. And what I wanted to share with you today is there is a whole world out there of opportunities when you have the golden ticket of a pharmacy degree in your hand. And community pharmacy, just to give a little bit of context, is pharmacy that maybe I think most everybody on the phone should be familiar with when you walk into a Walgreens or a Walmart or any of, King Soopers or CVS. These are all considered community pharmacies, and they're very accessible, and it's a really great opportunity for a pharmacy career. But this presentation is more about some of the other careers that you can take and invest yourself in that are outside of community pharmacy, and that may spark your interest if you are somebody who maybe already knows that you aren't interested in community pharmacy or want to better understand the different elements of career paths. So without further ado, I'm going to go into my next slide and give folks a sense of what we'll be covering today. First, I wanted to share a little bit about myself because my journey is a little bit atypical in and of itself, and also gives you a sense of what kind of journey you might take if you go to some of these other career paths. And then we'll spend most of our time on a couple of career paths that have a lot of different options within them for someone with a pharmacy degree, and then we'll end with some closing thoughts. So the first thing I want to share is that my journey started out when I was I grew up in Maine, and at the time that I went to school, there was no pharmacy schools there. That's quite a different story at this juncture, but I found myself with an interest in science, and I knew I didn't necessarily want to be, for instance, a nurse, because I felt like I wasn't the type of person that wanted to be so hands-on with patients. And I was thinking I didn't necessarily want to be a doctor given a fairly lengthy career progression. So I said, let me check this out. And I went to the library and pulled down some career books and found pharmacy. And then I took myself to the University of Connecticut, where I got my BS in pharmacy, and I actually got a BS in nutrition. When I was done with that, I worked for a little bit while I was trying to decide what I wanted to do next, because I was one of those people that didn't really want to be doing community pharmacy once I had done it for a little bit. So I found myself at Medical College of Virginia Hospitals in Richmond, Virginia, where I did my first residency. And some of you may be familiar with the terminology PGY1, and that's what our first residency year post-graduation from pharmacy school is called. Then I decided that I really wanted to get my doctor of pharmacy, and that's really the entry-level degree now. However, for me, it wasn't. So I went back to school at the University of Texas in San Antonio, and the main campus is in Austin, but the PharmD program was in San Antonio at the time. And I got my PharmD degree, and while I was there, I actually did a second residency that was very focused in nutrition support. And I was ready to go out into the world after all that education. And I found myself in New Jersey for both personal and professional reasons. And I was going to be somebody who was going to work with a couple of physicians in a nutrition and metabolism practice and write different orders at outlying hospitals and be a nutrition support pharmacist. And I was ahead of my time. There wasn't good liability or legal insurance to cover the type of work that we both wanted me to do, the physicians and myself. And so I found myself sort of without a job, and decided, and I was networking and fell into this industry that I was in for about 18 years called healthcare communications. And I started out as a medical director, and I worked my way up to president of 2 different companies. And then about 2 years ago now, I've joined Regis. But In the process of that, my last position was in Ohio as president of a 70-person healthcare communications company, and we were about 12 million in revenue. And I knew I didn't want to stay in that industry, and for a variety of reasons, and I wanted to try something new and challenge myself. So I went to Florida, University of Florida, to get my master's in pharmaceutical outcomes and policy. And that was actually a nice bridge and segue into where I am now, which is at Regis University as a department chair and associate professor of pharmacy practice. So that's a little bit about me. Clearly non-traditional. I did all of this work to be a clinical pharmacist, and then I completely diverted from that. But I can hands down tell you that all of the skills that I gained through pharmacy school were incredibly valuable through my career trajectory. So let's talk a little bit more about the career that I had and some of the options that are available because of that career path. And this is a slide that I'll kind of call the money slide. It's got a lot of information on it, so I'm going to spend a little bit of time on it, and then we'll continue through with some very specific information on the career that I was in and the relationship to the pharmaceutical industry. So if I can direct your attention to the bottom of the slide in the yellow box, that lists the many types of job opportunities that you can have with this degree. You can go into academia, which is what I currently am in. You can take a very administrative path, and you could be an administrator in a hospital or some other organization, for instance, a pharmacy benefit management organization. You can do administrative in the path that I took, and we'll talk more about that. You could work for a state association, the Colorado Pharmacist Society, any other of the state associations. You can work at a national level for pharmacy associations or other healthcare organizations. So association work is another path. You could work for a board of pharmacy. There's one in every single state. CE, continuing education. All of the health professions require some sort of continuing education to maintain your license as a practitioner. And so you could be involved in continuing education for the pharmacy field. Compounding. There are medicines that, for whatever reason, will need some compounding, and it could be that there's a very small patient population that needs that. It could be something very special that you need. So compounding pharmacy is pretty important, and there's a whole avenue of compounding that you can go into. Consulting. Consulting tends to be a later career opportunity, but you can be involved in companies that do consulting for other companies, and it can be a myriad of opportunities. It's usually a very busy lifestyle, but it's also a very rewarding lifestyle. Epidemiology, there's a lot of opportunities in that field. If you have a financial bent to yourself, you can be doing something that's financial within a hospital system, but is still related to pharmacy, because drugs cost money. You have to manage your formulary. You have to have fiscal knowledge to be doing some of the what's called sourcing. So there's a whole avenue that if you have a financial bent, you can pair that very well with pharmacy. HEOR, health outcomes and health economics and outcomes research, is a very important field of study with drugs and understanding the cost of those drugs in relation to the benefits that they provide. And so there's a whole myriad of things that a pharmacist can do within that space. HIT, health information technology. With the Affordable Care Act, there was a push to have electronic health records in every single health system and in doctors' offices, and there's a whole host of work that needs to be done that's very specific to pharmacy, and this is a pretty popular career. Again, law is another one that can be coupled very nicely with pharmacy. If you have that particular interest, you can be a lawyer for a pharmaceutical company, you can be a lawyer, certain associations need lawyers. There's really just a number of different places where pharmacy and law can marry very nicely. And then the last one is veterinary. There's veterinary pharmacies, there's veterinary compounding pharmacies. So you can highly specialize in the area of caring pharmaceutically for animals. So, I mean, I probably could stop there because there are so many options available to an individual with a pharmacy degree. But I am going to spend the next few minutes really diving into these alternate careers in the rest of this slide. In particular, we'll start at the top, and it says at the pharmaceutical company level. So the rest of this presentation is really going to be focused on what you can do within a pharmaceutical company and some of the service organizations and agencies that work with pharmaceutical companies. So there's this whole microcosm of things that you can do around the pharmaceutical industry. And I do recognize they don't necessarily have the best reputation, and yet they do provide a service to in and of their own right. And there's a lot of opportunities for those who are interested in that type of career. Within a pharmaceutical company, you can be doing something like marketing, safety, clinical, medical affairs, regulatory, and drug information. And and those are just different disciplines within the company. Then if you kind of go to the next level, there are parts of working with a pharmaceutical company where you can be in a support company. You can be in a company that works in conjunction with a pharmaceutical company. So in the orange, we have the agency services, and that's the area that I was in. I was in this publications and medical education space, and there's also a huge side of that industry where you do advertising and public relations. And so, you know, if you think about some of the drug company ads that you see on TV, those are done by consumer agencies, and those fall under this advertising area. And then there's this opportunity to do things freelance. You can be your own boss and work with these support companies and make a great living. If you are somebody who really likes to write and do scientific writing, it's a perfect place for you. Now, if we move towards the next column, which is in green, there's a number of companies that basically are outsources, which means they're an extension of the pharmaceutical company to do their main work. So these companies do a lot of clinical trials, and sometimes they don't always have those folks in-house to do that work, so they'll contract with another organization to manage their clinical trials. Sometimes drugs have a very specific way that they need to be used, and so the patient component of how they get their drugs and how that patient uses the drugs could be outsourced to a company that really specializes in handling the drug and making sure the patient takes it appropriately. That MR stands for market research, and that's a whole other area of pharmaceutical marketing, where you're looking at why certain people, like for instance, if you like a certain cereal, there's a whole bunch of market research that says why you like that cereal and what is your demographic, whether you're male, female, and ages and things like that. So market research is very honed in and looking at different people and their buying habits. And that becomes very important to folks who are in the marketing arm of a pharmaceutical company. Also, pharmaceutical companies are very regulated, and so they deal a lot with the government. One of their primary places that they deal with is the Food and Drug Administration, the FDA, and the FDA approves their drug. So there's a whole process for that drug development and approval. And there are pharmacists that work at the FDA that are interacting with pharmaceutical companies. CMS is Center for Medicaid Services, another government organization that presents opportunities for a pharmacy degree. The DEA is the Drug Enforcement Agency, and they deal with controlled substances, which is, I'm hoping most people are familiar with the fact that we are in an opioid crisis, opioid epidemic, and the DEA is in the thick of that. And then the Department of Justice, going back to my point about law and pharmacy being a nice marriage, there certainly could be opportunities to work for that government organization. The final column over here is the private sector, working with PBMs, pharmaceutical benefit management companies. They are in place to help manage the pharmacy product and manage formularies for large employers, for instance, a Coke or a Pepsi or you name it, any of the big employers here in the United States. But you could also work for an insurance company like United Healthcare, UHC, or Aetna, or any of the other big companies, because they have different positions where they need pharmacists in place. And then certainly, as I mentioned, you can be a lawyer, or you can work for an investment company that's looking to buy a small pharmaceutical company. And that knowledge of drugs and what drugs and clinical trials and why that drug might be relevant is really important to somebody who's looking to invest in a pharmaceutical company, for instance. So I know I spent a lot of time on this slide, but I think it's, as I said, a very important slide. Let me take another snapshot of the opportunities that exist for somebody who might be interested in working in a more drug development setting. Get to the next slide here. Oh, here we go. So there are definitely opportunities along the drug development continuum, starting with what's called phase 1, where you could be working, and these would typically require that you go beyond your PharmD degree and maybe get a PhD degree. But there's these whole host of drug discovery, toxicology, regulatory, where you can work as a pharmacist with a pharmacy degree and most likely also a PhD. And again, there might be some companies that you can that are outsourcing partners to the pharmaceutical company that you could be working with at this early phase. As you move along the continuum, within the pharmaceutical company, there are certainly pharmacists that work in clinical development or market research or clinical operations. That's really managing the clinical trial process or managing the drug distribution process. Manufacturing, a little less common, but certainly you could be working in manufacturing. Another one that might require the addition of a PhD. Below that arrow are the companies that I was mentioning before, companies like what I was in, which was medical education and publications. Those companies are working on educational materials for healthcare providers once a drug is approved, and during the development phases to help physicians and other healthcare providers understand what drugs are coming down the line. The publications are sort of the forefront of how the physicians get information about a drug, because they have to do these clinical trials and those get written up in publications. Moving along the continuum, as you get into phase 3, that's when the drug is at the pinnacle of being submitted to the FDA for approval, and there's a whole host of line functions from the pharmaceutical company side above the arrow that are interested in and are looking to develop that compound and share more information about it. And so you can see a number of different disciplines there. Below the line is again some of the disciplines I had on the prior slide, but this is kind of where they come in. They come in at phase 3. If you're an advertising agency or a direct-to-consumer or public relations company. And then once you get into phase 4, the drug's on the market, you may decide that you'd like to be in a more managed care focus, and that's where folks go out and talk to different employer groups and insurance companies and share information about a drug and what its benefits are, and in order for that particular organization to be interested in putting the drug on formulary. And then when something is on the market, there are different drugs that actually require patient support programs, and those programs are places where pharmacists also work, or companies that do those patient support programs are also companies where pharmacists can work. So if we continue to just dig a little bit deeper here, from a marketing perspective, there's a whole host of things that pharmacists can do. And this slide says what those different areas are. So what I'm doing now is literally drilling down on that one feature from my prior slide that said you could be in marketing. Well, in marketing, there's about 9 different functions, and that's not all of them. where you could be working in the pharmaceutical company in these different areas, all working towards the marketing of a particular brand. And so let's just, continue with Coke as our product. There is marketing around Coke. You see those advertisements all the time on the TV. There's a whole host of things that are happening behind the scenes in order to get that ad that you see on TV or on YouTube or other social media outlets. There's somebody behind what's being shown to you in those outlets. And it's usually a huge team, as you can see from this slide. And so if we just take a moment and say, well, what do some of these functions really do on a day-to-day basis? Well, if you're in market research, you're conducting interviews with people, and focus groups is when you're interviewing a group of people, or you're doing surveys, or maybe you're analyzing some data. Because remember, I said they capture all this data on your habits and what you're interested in and why you pick that particular drug as a physician. New product planning. Well, what are we going to do with this product, and how are we going to educate folks about the product, and who's going to be the people that are most interested in using the product once it gets on the market, and who could be in our clinical trials. And certainly there's what's called forecasting. We have to say, what kind of money do we need to support this product, and what kind of income do we expect to make? And there's a lot that goes into that. Business development is saying, okay, maybe I don't want to do the whole development process in my company, and I just want to go find a company that's developed the product that I want to buy, or maybe I want to co-promote with them. And so there's this business development aspect, and maybe you've gone back in addition to your PharmD, and maybe you're getting an MBA, a Master's in Business Administration. This is a good place for you. And that reminds me, as a school, we have a dual degree with our PharmD and our Master's in Health Services Administration. And that is a really ideal degree, dual degree, for you to take if you want to go down an administrative path in a number of different options, mostly related to healthcare systems that I was talking about in that earlier slide. So not that you have to do a dual degree, but I think there's this opportunity with our school to be able to do something that will bring a lot of added value to your career. And then just to kind of finish on this slide, there's managed healthcare. I talked a little bit about that, but that's where you're really interfacing with people who are the payers, the people who are the big employers, and folks who are paying the bills when it comes to the healthcare insurance that you or perhaps your parents or others get through an employer. So some of these may appeal to you, but I think the point to make is that it's a very diverse opportunity base that you have and when you get the PharmD degree. From a medical education and communications perspective, within a pharmaceutical company, there's so much that you can do with your degree. And there's a really nice fit, not only in marketing, but in medical affairs, where you're really focusing on the medical side or the scientific side of the product, and helping healthcare professionals and patients to better understand the drug by giving them information, helping with those clinical trials that I mentioned, helping to write up publications, to share the results of these clinical trials. And that's internal, but then there's also what's called medical science liaisons, and they're out sort of the feet on the ground, meeting with individual practitioners and helping to educate them about products or upcoming clinical trials that they could be involved in. And then medical communications, being the career path that I was in, the advertising agencies is a big piece of that, and then the medical education providers, which I was part of, is the other side. So what I've drilled down on here is, aside from all the other careers and the marketing side of things, there's this whole medical education and communication side that's both on the pharmaceutical companies as well as support companies like medical education providers. If I drill down just a little bit more on the medical education side and advertising side, this slide gives you a sense of there's pretty much 4 big players in the medical education space. It's Publicis, it's WPP, Omnicom Group, and IPG. And all these symbols, or logos, I should say, are from different companies that fall under these 4 umbrellas. And I personally used to work at what was called ProEd Communications, up there in the upper right, or maybe upper left to you as you look at this. And so a whole host of places that you can go work for if you want to be in this medical education and agency support side. The next couple of slides, I think they're kind of fun because they're slides from when I was in my medical education job, and we had to sell our business, and it's a very service-oriented business. It's based on people developing different things, publications or digital communications, and so people were developing these things, and this is one of our promotional, or if you will, selling tools. But the fun part is working with my creative friends and colleagues to develop this type of visual aid so I can go out and explain to people what it is that we do and why you should hire us. And so this one was a real core slide, and then the next slide was a real fun one because we were trying to develop some tools that were more social media related, and this is one where we took a play on a favorite drink of many people, which is espresso, and recognizing that most people today like really small bites of information, and we would be able to provide this through this social media site, and we had a whole coffee theme around it, and kind of getting the concept that a lot of times you'll go to a Starbucks or a Dunkin' Donuts and have a cup of coffee and sit around and talk, and it's a great way to share information. So I never really won any, I never sold this particular item, but I won a lot of business because of its creativity, and I think it was fun to come up with it, and it was fun to try and sell it. And so I think it's a real creative business that you can get into as well. And then this last slide I wanted to show is just, we had a whole structure around this. And if you have a PharmD degree, you can easily be in the blue side, in the orange side. It's a logical place. You use the scientific knowledge that you've gained within this context. But clearly I migrated onto the blue side because I got into being the person that was the face for our clients, and then I made my way up to a client service lead and ultimately president of an organization. And so I would say to you that the sky's the limit in the profession that I came from, in terms of really expanding not only your scientific knowledge, but your project management skills, your creative skills. There's a lot that can be done. So this is just a organizational chart to give you a sense of how those companies are organized, and also where you can play a role. This next slide is a little bit different look at my career path, along with a colleague of mine who actually went through a marketing path, and it just shows you the career progression. And I'll focus on my colleague Brian because he was in a pharmaceutical company and he was also in the advertising space. And I've already kind of given you my spiel. So if we follow the top line here, he started out doing a fellowship with Parke-Davis through Rutgers University. He started out as a sales rep, and then he went into the marketing side of things through global new product planning. Then he was to a product manager for a specific drug called Acupril, which is used for hypertension. He made his way up to director of marketing on a couple of different occasions, and senior director, and then he left the pharmaceutical companies and went into the agency side and became a group account director, so somebody who's working with pharmaceutical companies. And then he made his way up to a management supervisor, a general manager, and now he owns his own business, and he's had that for the past 9 years or so, and continues to have his own business based on all the experience that he's developed. And quite frankly, I would put him in that consulting category that I mentioned earlier in the presentation. So talked a lot about what the potential paths are. I'm hoping that folks are stoked with the multitude of opportunities. Let's talk a little bit about the benefits and some of the drawbacks of being in this area of industry and what I call support services. Certainly, you can have a high level of impact. You have a very flexible schedule. I think, if you work in a community pharmacy or in a hospital inpatient pharmacy, there tends to be a little less flexibility. You really need to be there at 8 a.m. or whatever your shift starts, and then you're there for the duration. And sometimes you have to punch in, punch out. Whereas these types of jobs, there's a little more flexibility. Certainly many travel opportunities depending on what you get into. And a great opportunity for growth based on the hopefully you saw from the career progressions. I mean, there's just a tremendous opportunity to grow in various different directions. And you're working with a lot of different team members and meeting different people. And there's tremendous variety. I used to joke that my Fridays were either really good or really bad, and the week preceding that you just never knew what you'd have a plan for a day, and then something would change that plan for any number of reasons. And so I think the variety is also very intriguing depending on what interests you. Some of the drawbacks, if you really want that patient contact, these particular industries probably aren't the way to go, and that's okay. And that's a question to ask yourself. Would you want to have that patient contact? I had a class with our first year students the other day, and I had 3 of them telling me, I'm like, well, why did you pick pharmacy? And 3 of them said, well, we were originally in PT, but we really decided that we didn't like that aspect of, touching the patient. So I think, that's something you have to look into yourself and kind of think about. And there's no judgment. Everybody has different perspectives. So it's one of the drawbacks, though, for this is if you want that patient contact, probably not the best way to go. Job security. I mean, pharmaceutical industry has undergone a lot of consolidation. There's acquisitions, there are mergers. That also creates opportunity if you're interested, because you never know what's around the next corner. But it also, if you really want job security, sometimes that's not always the case. You tend to be very focused on one medication or therapeutic area. A lot of variety within that, but there's that. And then, as I call it, corporate politics. And I think at the end of the day, for those who are familiar with this, corporate politics are probably everywhere. But there's pretty much a higher degree if you're going to work in industry, and understanding that is important before picking a career in these industries. So what's a good fit? If you like opportunities for advancement, the ability to shift your career focus, the dynamic and changing nature of this environment, being somebody who might be a subject matter expert in one therapeutic area, and instead of that real one patient focus, there is a chance to really influence many, many more patients, thousands to millions. The travel component in terms of attending conferences, meetings, and you have a chance to become really well known in your company or the industry based on your success. And if you like giving presentations, writing documents, leading meetings, there's some real opportunities for you in these 2 spaces. And some things that will help you to excel, is if you're able to work in teams and groups, if you are a jack of all trades, but maybe not a master of none, being able to say that I have a plan, but I can change that plan, and sometimes it's not in your control. Really, I think a lifelong learning is essential for any pharmacy job. And knowing that you may not always have the one-on-one interactions with the patients, as I mentioned, the travel can be pretty frequent depending on what part of the industry you get in. It's not a 9-to-5 job. Some of it will follow you home and you'll be on the road, but if, that's also opportunity. And you'll really be honing your oral and written communication skills through these opportunities. A few misconceptions, if you will, or questions that tend to come up. Yes, you have to work weekends for some of the reasons I've already mentioned. Marketing is actually a hard path to get into. You really have to sort of earn your way into that. And that's probably a good opportunity for me to mention that some of the jobs that I'm mentioning, I mean, you're not going to get into them at entry level, but you can make your way up, and that career trajectory or path can be fairly quick, and is more dependent on you and your ability to adapt and grow within the position. But you do have to earn the ability to get into some of these positions. Not everybody, there's only so many CEOs and vice presidents. Not everybody's going to be able to advance to that level. And in particular to marketing, it's hard to move into marketing is a hard one to get into is the main point. And so you really have to be dedicated to that particular path and finding, the right moves to get into marketing. But it's a very rewarding career and has a lot of opportunity, even if you're not directly in it, so to speak. And then this slide just gives some insights into how to get into pharmaceutical industry. There is a fellowship opportunity, and there's an organization that's very focused on these fellowships called, and it's www.industrypharmacist.org. There's a lot of different entry-level positions, and they won't be pharmacist specific, but you will definitely have a leg up by having that background. And I mentioned the medical science liaisons. Sometimes they're difficult to find coming directly out of pharmacy school, but you can find your way in through these service organizations called contract organizations or clinical research organizations. So there are ways to make your way into the industry. And then there's also on the having a hospital, on the hospital side or the retail side, getting that business degree or getting that hospital administration degree like we have here at Regis is another one. And certainly starting out through drug safety and other areas are pathways into the industry in general. The space that I came from, a logical point of entry for somebody with a pharmacy degree is to be a medical or scientific director. You'd usually work through a recruiter or through networking to get that kind of position. You may need to take a writing test. And, again, you're going to start at the bottom of the food chain. You're going to learn the ropes, but I firmly believe and know from experience that your escalation path can be very swift, depending on your skills and your aptitude. I think everybody always wants to know, well, what's the salary? And pharmacists working in that Walgreens or CVS or Costco or King Soopers, they are making out of school a six-figure salary, over 100,000. But this slide shows you that you can also get into that range, maybe not directly out of school, but you can certainly get into that range based on different careers and so agency on the right hand in figure 2, the second column, you can see the agency figure is at 150,000, and that would be the space that I was in. So there's a lot of different opportunities as it relates, and you can make a comparable salary. You'll probably need to work your way up to it, but then you'll actually have the capacity to go much higher than a community pharmacist in the end. So I'm at the close of the presentation here. I'll give a couple of other thoughts and then be happy to take any questions. I brought this slide back up again because we spent a fair amount of time on it earlier in the presentation. I want to highlight that I did spend a lot of time talking about pharmaceutical company opportunities and some of the support services around the pharmaceutical company. but there is a tremendous amount of career options in that yellow box that we spent some time on, and I want to highlight that the breadth of opportunities is really quite endless from my humble perspective and having lived through some of them. Leave you with some interview tips. I mean, I think today you want to be very clear about, you know, why you want to work in an organization, and you want to make sure you learn about that organization. If it's a public organization, you can really dig into their annual report and their proxy statements and their 10K, and these are things that if you're kind of going down that business path, or things you'd want to know about and look up. You want to make sure that you have people who are ready to give be a reference for you, and know the work ethic that you have. Social media is a big thing, and you want to make sure that there's nothing questionable out there that an HR department or an interviewer could find out about you. And remember that when you interview, they don't know you, so it's good to kind of keep to a minimum and not talk about sort of interpersonal problems you've had and things that you haven't done well academically. At the end of the day, you are selling yourself, and so think about yourself in the best light and recognize that we're all human and we've all made mistakes, and let's not focus there, but focus on what you want these folks to know about you, and try to make that opportunity as memorable as you can. So those are just a few thoughts that are applicable to any opportunity that you're looking to interview for, but hopefully some good reminders. And what I'd like to do is see if we can take some questions through the chat. I really want to thank everybody for their attention. There's a wonderful group of you on the line here, and I am really just thankful for so many of you taking the time to hear about these alternative careers. So please jump away into the chat and ask any questions that are coming to mind based on the presentation. I'm not seeing any questions, so I'll just tell you that the picture on the slide while I'm waiting for some questions is some poppies in my my parents' backyard, and for those of you who don't know, poppy is a source of opium, so I thought it was kind of somewhat fitting pharmaceutical related picture. Does anybody have questions about any specifics of the different careers, or anything that I said that maybe didn't make sense, or well, thank you. I'm glad that it's opened your eyes. The world of pharmacy really is very big, and I think that, you know, it's a little cliche, but the world is your oyster. The veterinary path, do you have any specifics about that? Well, I think the veterinary path is very interesting, and you know, quite frankly, if I had it do over, I would definitely go down that path. You know, I mean, first thing is to get your degree, and you have to do the basics, but I think you can look to do internships with veterinary pharmacies. They're not quite as prevalent, but you can do internships. And then I believe there is some certification in the veterinary path, but I'd be happy to also make sure that we're able to provide this as some supplemental information to the folks that are on the phone, for me to be able to get you a little bit more information on the veterinary path. Let's see, we have a question about infectious disease side of pharmacy. So infectious disease is a very popular and very important part. There are infectious disease, so you can get your doctor of pharmacy, you can do a residency in infectious disease. It's a very important part of pharmacy, given there hasn't been a lot of innovation in pharmaceuticals related to antibiotics. And so when we run into resistance, when we run into diseases that we don't have antibiotics for, I mean, there's a whole host of areas of infectious disease that are incredibly important, and a pharmacist can be very valuable in working with physicians and other healthcare providers who are prescribing to make sure that we have appropriate prescription of antibiotics. So it's a very important area if you're interested in it. I don't think I'm in a position to make any recommendations one way or the other regarding a particular organization. Certainly, Doctors Without Borders is a phenomenal organization, and I think the decision and recommendation to join or not join really is a very individual decision. And my best recommendation to you is to network with people who've either been a part of Doctors Without Borders or have an association with that organization that can give you more of the pros and cons so that you can make your own decision and recommendation for yourself. So the next question I see is, does Regis have all those classes? So the things I've been talking about today are really related to career paths that you can take. And the foundation of those career paths is a degree. And, without question, you should come to Regis. But, the foundation is the degree. Then how you choose to use that degree and how you choose to explore that. We have a wealth of folks here, myself and 28 other faculty members who have different experiences that can all contribute to the different paths that we were talking about today. And if we don't have that information, we'll be able to network to get you that information. So I think the key is that the foundation is the PharmD degree, and then you start to look for those different career paths. And then there's things that you do outside of the core curriculum, whether you're involved in a student organization, whether you choose to do some outside work and intern, harkening back to the veterinary pharmacy comment that I made. You can intern in places that you're interested in eventually maybe working in. You could intern in a law office, a healthcare law office, for instance. So, to the career paths that we talked about today are kind of how you use the degree. The classes at Regis are how you get the degree, if that makes sense. Keep those questions coming. They're great questions. And I want to thank all of you. You're very kind for sending your thanks. I appreciate it. It's been a delight to be able to share this with you. I'm very passionate about the fact that this degree is just so great and has so many opportunities that, I can't speak enough about it. Let's see. So veterinary pharmacy and what more so the veterinary pharmacy side of things, it could be you are taking, there are veterinary medications. Most of the major pharmaceutical companies, the Pfizers, the GSKs, I believe, they all have an arm that does veterinary pharmacy, and it takes human drugs and makes them for animals. And then there are some drugs that are very specific for animals, like flea medication and heartworm medication. So there are definitely pharmaceutical companies out there that focus on veterinary medicine and veterinary pharmacy. So quite frankly, you could work for one of them. But also then you would be dispensing those medications to owners of pets. So you would be dispensing those that are made by pharmaceutical companies. And then you could also be compounding some. I know I had a cat, and we ended up buying compounded. Our cat needed to be on a hypertension med, and that needed to be compounded. So we got it from a compounding veterinary pharmacy. So you could be doing that, and then so I think there's a whole dimension to veterinary pharmacy, and quite a few different sort of sub careers within that. That you could choose, and based on the prior question, we'll be trying to get some more information out to folks on veterinary pharmacy. In terms of the job market for clinical pharmacists, I'd say that the market for pharmacy is very geographically dependent. Here in Denver, it's very hard to find a job for clinical pharmacists. It's what we call a saturated market. If you're willing to work in some more rural areas of Colorado, or I think I saw earlier some folks from Arizona, I mean, and quite frankly, I think in Arizona, the Indian Health Service is very robust. And so that's another avenue that you could take. So I digress for a minute. But I think if you're willing to go into some more rural settings, as you entertain a degree in pharmacy, our career counselors can talk to you about sort of where the markets are that might be a little bit more saturated versus those that aren't. And so my net answer to you is there's a great job market for clinical pharmacists. It is something that it'd be slightly dependent on where you want to work and what kind of things you might be willing to do to start out, and sort of meaning maybe you'd be in a more rural place, or you might move to a state that has more need. But there's really great opportunities for clinical pharmacists as well. Keep those questions coming. I'm excited to answer them. Just looking back at the chat here. So, we've got some folks from California. I mean, same thing applies in terms of, and I'm not quite sure of the market in California, but I think at the end of the day, we have that information and are definitely able to kind of give you a sense of the different markets for clinical pharmacy, for community pharmacy, and all the like. Well, I think that I really appreciate all the questions. They've been great questions. And, oh wait, do we have another one here? Do you need another degree to pursue it? I don't think you do. There might be a certification. I'm not 100% sure, but a PharmD degree is certainly your gateway, and it may just be a special certification. I'm not aware that you need another degree per se, because the pharmacy degree is really the foundation. There's certainly some nuances to veterinary pharmacy, and not all human drugs are applicable to animals. And the research that's done in the animal community is that's something that really should and can be stepped up. And so what we know about how drugs work in animals is less. But at the end of the day, your foundational knowledge that you get in pharmacy school is more than enough. And that supplemental information, I'll just make sure that there's not another degree, which I'm 99% sure that there isn't. Thank you from the CU Denver Pre-Pharmacy Society, as well as everybody else that's asked about veterinary pharmacy. So I'm so intrigued to see that interest. That's great. I think at this point, I'm going to thank everybody for their attention and your time, and we'll look forward to sending some follow-up information. And let me just quickly maybe try to go back to that. Oh, no, here's you see, I'm going to go to the next slide. It's got my contact information. Please take that down. I'm be more than happy to answer any questions that come up after we hang up today, and look forward to entertaining any of those, because as I said, I'm very passionate about this topic. So let me just check the chat one more time to see if there's any remaining questions, and if not, then we will be on our merry way. Thank you, everybody. You have a great rest of the day.